In the previous section, we really nailed down the remainder of what it means to test our applications in an automated fashion. We also discussed how the testing story can become very subjective. Good luck in your adventures in testing in the future. This is the 7th of an 8-section course on the mean stack. Over the next 5 videos, we will be walking through the process of digging into Grunt distribution scripts, deploying our application, and node process variables. This is the first video in this section. In this video, we will be digging deep into the difference between build and distribution tasks in Grunt. To start off, let's get an understanding as to why we have a distribution task. The application is running fine under the build task. We must, however, consider that in production, we have resources to manage that do not exist in development. One such resource is bandwidth. While seemingly unlimited, it is not without consequence. On the side of hosting, it often costs per gig. On the side of the consumer, we must consider mobile devices. Request load is another such resource. On the side of hosting, the more requests made, the larger the load to handle, the higher risk of failure. On the side of consumers, applications that are too chatty cause issues again on mobile devices. To solve these two resource concerns, we do 2 things. Concatenate all like file types into one and uglify those files. These are primarily what we'll spend our time on in this video. Now take note, there are times it's not possible, or far from convenient, to include files into one. I've left one such example in the codebase. It is importing our vendor CSS file for data tables. Let's first highlight the tasks that occurred during the build task. We've seen this before. This is important because the first task in the distribution is the build task. After the build task runs, we copy a few required assets into the dist folder. We have one vendor CSS file that I mentioned before. We also have some images and fonts that are required for our application to run. These will be the only requested files outside of our concatenated and uglified CSS and JS files. The next task is concat. This will build a single file for all JS and CSS files respectively, except for the one CSS file we copied to the dist folder. The next task is ng-annotate. This is going to take our single JS file and set up all Angular injections so they are not broken when uglification occurs. Remember that Angular injection is name-based. We cannot afford uglification the opportunity to change the names of the injected parameters on injectable objects. The next task is uglify. This is going to take the single JS file and perform uglification or minification. It will change variable names to single character names, remove all the white spaces, comments, and more. These settings are all configurable, but the defaults are acceptable. Little pro tip: if you're having trouble with uglification, the file maybe isn't compiling. Uncomment the options section to beautify the file. This means that you'll be able to read it and determine where the issue is. The next task is less dist. Now, this is going to take the built main.less file, compile it into CSS, compress it, and drop it in the distribution folder. The compression step does not occur during the build task. Finally, the last task is index dist. This is going to build the appropriate index.html file based on the files that were included in the distribution folder. In the end, that becomes just 3 files. Compare that to the greater than 20 files required during development, and you see why distribution builds are important. This was a great video on distribution builds and understanding why they're important. That brings us to the end of this video. In our next video, we are going to be discussing how to publish your code to Heroku.